Hi everyone, this is the PowerPoint for the lecture on hominins. Okay. Let's get started, just get right into it. So not too long of a PowerPoint. I know, like I've said this multiple times, that we're going to be covering some of the bio stuff in this class just because it'll make sense. Oh my god. Just so it'll make sense as we're building up to like modern humans and the cultural experience. We have to kind of take a step back and look back at the past to see some of the other factors that were involved. But we're not getting involved in some of these topics as much as we do in the biological anthropology course. So when I teach that class, I obviously, like, we spend much more time on these subjects. So if you've taken that class before with me or with someone else, you know that we it's a lot more extensive. But I'm giving you guys kind of just a basic overview of some of this stuff. So, okay, so we'll get right into it. So the PowerPoint hominins and slide 2. Oh, good. Oh, sorry. I think that's the first time I've yawned on a video. Oh, it's not that late. It's like 3 o'clock. Just one of those days, you know. Okay, so hominins. So if you weren't sure what a hominin was, and well, I think did I tell you guys to talk about this in another PowerPoint? I'm not sure. I say that a lot. I'm sorry. So okay, so you can see here in this picture though that what a hominin is everything in the human lineage since our split with chimpanzees. So if you're looking at this chart, you can see that, so this is called a cladogram. You see it's kind of showing the relationships between gorillas, humans, and chimpanzees. Now, if you were to look at just those three type specimens, myself included in the Homo sapiens, if you were to look just visually, you might think, and if I told you, okay, of those three, 2 are more closely related to each other, and there's a third one that's kind of the odd one out. Just visually, you might think, well, it must be the chimp and the gorilla who are probably a little more closely related, and the humans are the odd one out. And that's what people thought for a long time. So this is why I should have prefaced it with. So we have the word hominin now. You might see the word hominid. Now it has a current meaning, but it also used to have another meaning that meant the same thing as the word hominin does now. It's very confusing, I know. So if you're ever reading like an older article or an older textbook, or talking to a professor, like an older professor, they will often use the term hominid with a D to mean the exact same thing as hominin. But this is like the new term we use because basically with DNA we realized, well, actually, the 3 of us are closely related, but humans and chimps are actually more closely related to each other than either one of them is to gorillas. Gorillas are the odd one out. And so there was a little bit of, reorganizing, renaming, and so, anyway. But if you're looking at this picture, this gives you a good general idea that, so we did not evolve from chimpanzees. They are our closest living relative. We share a common ancestor with them. We split with that common ancestor, or we split with chimpanzees at about approximately 6 million years ago. So that was the time of that last common ancestor. So that ancestor lived in the world and, was split into at least 2 different populations, probably for some ecological or geographical region, and one evolutionary trajectory, eventually came chimpanzees, and then one eventually became humans. But it's not a nice straight line like that at all. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see, so my impressive work in the software called Paint. You can see, so here we have explaining again what a hominin is. So here you have this nice, you see like the V little graph. So chimpanzees, humans, last common ancestor. So everything in that line where that arrow is pointing to, that's a hominin. Everything in that lineage. Now that's a nice straight line. It's easy to kind of imagine it that way, but if you look at the picture next to it, you see it's not like that at all. It's very complex. There are a lot of lineages that split off of other ones that eventually were at an evolutionary dead end. No ancestry after like so many hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years. Plenty of branching events, and it's how nature works. It's not just like super simple. It's always very complex, and we are still kind of piecing some of it together. And every time, as paleoanthropologists, every time we think, we're pretty sure we know the whole story, we discover something new. So we'll be talking about that a little bit, a little today, and a little bit in the next one as well. And I'm sure in 10 years or 15 years, we're going to have even more, we're going to find even more fossils and be like, oh, so now it makes sense. We, like how it is in science, we're always, kind of leaning towards the truth. We're trying to, you're aiming that way, and with new evidence, the picture becomes clearer and fuller, and so that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so what is a hominin, more specifically? So if you go to slide 4, you'll see there are 6 traits that characterize hominins as a group. So these are a group of traits, or what we call sometimes a suite of traits. And these are the 6 traits. So it's also important to remember that oh my gosh. Okay. As we go through these 6 traits, you'll see at the very bottom of this slide there's a phrase called mosaic evolution. So we talked before about those 5 forces of evolution. This is not a different force of evolution. This is just a conceptual idea. Basically means when we're looking at a group of traits like this, like we're looking at these 6 now for hominins. In the other PowerPoint, we talked about primates and those traits that primates share. When we're looking at those traits, especially right now, we're talking about these 6 for hominins. It's important to remember that, so the hominin lineage is about 6 million years old. And these 6 traits characterize us as a group. But it's not as if these 6 traits all happened at exactly the same time and at exactly the same rate. That's not what happened. And that'll kind of make sense as we go through some of these, but just know, like, as a group, these 6 traits, as a suite of traits, as a group of traits, characterize us as a group. But you're going to see some exceptions. You're going to see one thing happening a little before another thing, one thing happening very quickly, another thing happening more slowly, but I hope that makes sense. Okay, so it's these 6, and I'm pretty sure I have a slide for each, but I'll just name them right now. So we have larger brain, bipedal locomotion, parabolic dental arch, reduced prognathism, no CP3 honing complex, and thick enamel. So some of those terms are like, I'm not sure what those terms mean. We're going to go through them. Don't stress about this too much. I know there's a lot of terminology in this class, and if you're in the bio class with me, there's a lot more terminology. I know that can be a little overwhelming, but don't worry too much. I'll point out the things that I really want you to be more aware of. Okay. So slide 5, larger brain size. So here you can, so humans, I already said this, did not evolve from chimpanzees. We share a common ancestor with them. However, we will often use them to compare, because they are our closest living relatives. So we do a lot of comparisons, like looking up, to understand like evolutionary relationships and evolutionary trajectories and stuff. So here you can just see, comparing a human to our closest living relative, the chimpanzee, with the brain size, our brains are a lot bigger. And it's important to know, so real quick, so if you look at the picture, you see that the human brain is much larger, and modern humans, the average brain size is about 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters, or cc's, and for the chimpanzees, it's around 400. So there's a significant difference. And there's something I want to point out. It's not necessarily about the absolute brain size. It's something we call, I'm not going to spell out the whole thing. It's something we call Encephalization Quotient, but very simply, we abbreviate this to EQ. EQ. So basically what this references is that some brains are going to be bigger, some are going to be smaller, but that's not really what's more important, because we can infer a lot about brain size. What is more important is, what is the size of the brain compared to the size of the body? So like, for example, you as a human have a certain size brain. And you could look at like a whale, let's say, for example, or an elephant. That's a much larger animal. And you could say, whoa, like their brain's larger. But that makes sense because they are larger. So what we really want to look at when you want to start inferring things from brain size, like cognition or intelligence or language capabilities or whatever it might be, you want to look at that encephalization quotient. Basically what that is looking at that ratio between the brain size and the body size. So basically what it means, because you can like Google like, the EQ of whatever animal. Basically this idea is, if you were to look at all of animals and say, okay, given, and you had all the data on their body sizes and brain sizes, you would say, okay, the average, or looking at, let's say we're looking at humans, for example, you might say, okay, well, looking at an animal of this particular size, based on what we know about the animal world, we would expect to see a brain size in this animal of about, this size. Well, we have a significantly larger brain than you'd expect for an animal of our size, so we have a high EQ. So, so it's not like I said, it's not necessarily like the absolute brain size, like this, the cubic centimeter number, although that can be important sometimes. It's really that encephalization quotient. That's going to tell you a lot more. When you have an animal with a high EQ, and what we know now, with this research is, those animals that do have a high EQ tend to have like much more complex social interactions, higher levels of cognition in multiple ways, typically some kind of form of complex language or communication. So it tells us a lot. So humans have a high EQ. Most of the species in our genus, like Neanderthals or Homo erectus, like they had a higher EQ. Most apes, no surprise there, have a higher EQ. Dolphins, elephants, I think. Did I mention this one before? Pigs have a higher EQ, I think. Some of these won't be like too surprising, and then you have plenty of animals who are average and have about the size brain you'd expect for an animal of that size. So it's not just about brain size, but in general, we do have larger brains and we do have higher EQs in terms of like us as like hominins in this group. We also have, you can see this too in the picture, that we have, it's not just like the size of the brain, but we see a change over time of the brain, and the head kind of gets more rounded, and we end up getting more of a forehead. So we don't really see this until like the last, couple of million years, where we actually have a lot of our brain is on top versus like behind our eyes. It's like on top of our head instead. That's newer evolutionarily. Okay, in like our lineage. So the second thing, so slide 6, bipedalism, and this is one we're going to talk about a lot. It's probably the defining feature of our lineage when we're looking at, oh man, these girls in the background today, huh? You okay? Just thinking about it. Okay. Super snotty. As a side note, for those of you who, like, I think I've mentioned this a few times with what's going on with her. She's had allergies for like 6 months. She's never had allergies before. She's like 11. She's never had allergies before, but she doesn't have any other symptoms. And I took her, and I think the first time was like March or April to the vet, and because she's snot, and the vet was like, doggy allergies very common here. And I said, even though we've lived here for 5 years and she's never had them either before we moved here or after. She's like, well, it's like a weird season for allergies. I'm like, okay. Tried her on like 2 different allergy medications, didn't help. Steroids kind of helped her, some of the inflammation. Antibiotics, they gave just a seed, and that didn't help. We finally, just like last week, I got her in. We got her. They did they put her out, and they had like a nasal swab. Oh, and then that came back like nothing. It's like, I don't want bad news, but it's like I want news of something. They did a head X-ray, and no masses, no bony growth, so nothing, no horrible news. But she still has all this snot all the time. So we have her on a new medication. It's like the 6th medication. She just started it 2 days ago. So, and if this one doesn't work, we have another one we're gonna try. And I just she's like eating, drinking, has energy, but she's snotty. It's like you can just hear it. I feel so bad for her. Anyway, you guys know so much about my life, but she's always in the background making snotty noises. So okay, okay. So bipedalism, like I said, it's probably the defining feature. Big brains and bipedalism, but I would say bipedalism is probably, because so many other, and this is why I talk about it in this class, in the cultural class, is that so many things happen for our lineage because suddenly we have our hands free to do so many things, and we're going to talk about like why that's very important. So bipedalism, walking on 2 limbs versus 4. So that's quadrupedalism. We talked about that in the primate. Briefly, we talked about that in the primate PowerPoint. Slide 7. Another feature of hominins, parabolic dental arch versus, so this is in contrast to parallel tooth rows. So if you look at this picture on the left versus the picture on the right, the first picture on the left is one of human, the picture on the left, no, I'm so sorry. The picture on the left, right, Alicia. Okay, the picture on the left is the one of the human, the picture on the right is the one of the chimp. I don't even know if I said it wrong the first time. I'm so sorry, guys. Okay, I'm sure you can figure out which one's which, right? So humans, as hominins, we have that parabolic, the nice curve. Essentially, what's happening is our faces are getting smaller over time, and so we have the same number of teeth. Our teeth do get smaller over time too, but we have the same number of teeth. They kind of have to still fit in that same area, and so we end up seeing this, because their faces are getting flatter, that the teeth end up, instead of being like straight out like this, they have this nice curve to them. So that's why. And this goes hand in hand with number 4, so slide 8. So you'll see reduced prognathism. We talked about this term before in the primate PowerPoint. So prognathism, remember that's the projection of the face. You can be prognathic, more prognathic, less prognathic, or when you have no prognathism, like a human, when essentially our faces are flat, we call that orthognathic. So you can see that in the pictures, that's a chimp versus a human. You can see that the human face basically is pretty flat, and the chimpanzee has a little bit more of that snout, sort of, kind of, not as extreme. And it's mostly in the mouth portion. It's not like really in the nose, but it's, you know, that projection of the face. So for hominins, so for primates, remember we talked about primates compared to non-primates have reduced prognathism. That's accurate. And then hominins, so our lineage that lasts 6 million years compared to all other primates, we have even more reduced prognathism. So slide number 9. So we have number 5 and number 6 of this suite of traits. So no CP3 honing complex. So we didn't really talk about that with the primates, but basically you can see in the picture. So it's this tooth complex. Basically, it's these 3 teeth: the upper canine, the very large upper canine, the bottom canine, and then the bottom premolar. And so, like on both sides. Basically, what this serves as. So we talked about large canine teeth among primates is due to sexual selection. So as a warning, or in a fight, it's a weapon. So actually, those 2 bottom teeth that split it, that space between is called a diastema, and it leaves that space open for that large upper tooth, and it actually serves to sharpen that tooth for combat, you know. So it's a whole thing. So our lineage doesn't have that. The very first, and this is what I was saying before about mosaic evolution, it's not as if, you know, that first hominin was like, I have a big brain and no big canine, and I'm walking bipedally. It didn't happen all at the same time very quickly like that. But we do see, so we see a kind of a moderate-sized canine in the beginning, and then that canine pretty much goes away, that large canine goes away fairly quickly. It's pretty small for the remainder of our lineage. And then number 6, thick enamel. So this is rare among other apes. They tend to have thin enamel on the teeth, so this is interesting in terms of like dietary differences. So those are the 6 traits, and we're going to focus on bipedalism a little more. So slide 10. And some of the changes that happen because of bipedalism. So the first one is that the spinal curves have changed. So you can see here, this is showing a chimp and a human. It has the chimp like in an upward, like a standing up position, just so you can see a better comparison. That the human has more of like an S shape, that there's 2, we have like the cervical curve and then the lumbar curve at the bottom, so one on the top, one on the bottom. In class I would ask you, you know, when do you think during an individual's lifetime do these things start to develop? So, but I can't ask you, so I'll just tell you. So for humans and other bipeds, like in our lineage, when that individual can start to hold up their own head is when that cervical curve will start to form. So like most of you are probably aware, if you've ever like been around an infant, like a newborn especially, they can't hold up their own head. They don't have like the strength, the muscles, like everything's still like forming. And so you have to be very, very careful with it, so you have to do it. But once they can do it on their own, then that starts to form, and then once that individual starts walking, that lumbar curve starts to form. But for the quadruped, because they're not, like their body weight, the reason it happens is because our body weight's on our spine. It's not on the spine in the same way at all for a quadruped, so they just have kind of one kind of curve to their spine. Slide 11, another difference between a quadruped and a biped. That's not is the arches of the foot. So when we think of the arches of the foot, we tend to think of that one that kind of runs from like our heel to our toe, but we actually have 2 arches. So that long one from like the heel to the toe is called the longitudinal arch. Sometimes it's called the medial arch, but we would call it longitudinal arch. And then we also have one that kind of runs left to right, like side to side. That's called the transverse arch. So you can see here in the picture, it's showing a chimpanzee and a human foot. You see, well, one, you can see that they have that divergent big toe or divergent hallux. Humans have a non-divergent hallux. So all of our toes are in line with each other. This is very weird. Comparing us to other apes, like we think the other thing looks weird because we're used to looking at human feet, but in reality, like evolutionarily, like in terms of like, you know, ancestry and stuff, like our foot looks very strange that we have that. But it makes sense because we have a completely different type of locomotion. So you probably noticed that right away. But if you look at the one of the drawing with like the bones, you'll see that that nice longitudinal arch from like, heel to toe for the biped, and then the quadruped doesn't have that. So this is because we have our entire body weight now in two limbs. There has to be a whole system of support and kind of shock absorption for that to happen. So that's why we have that. Number 3, so slide 12, you'll see we actually even have a difference in the shape of our femur. So that's the bone in the upper leg. And you can kind of see here in this picture, it's showing a human and a chimpanzee. And I know some of these terms, I'm not gonna be like, what's that very specific anatomical term? Don't stress about that. But if you look at the picture, you'll see that there's kind of more of an angle to the bipedal, so to the human femur. And that's because on that, what we call the distal portion, or that part, towards by the knee, there are kind of two bulbous parts to the end of the femur. We call those the condyles, the medial condyle and the lateral condyle. Our medial condyle is a bit larger, so actually with that bone, because it's larger on this side, it kind of angles, versus in the quadruped, they're about the same size. So if you took a femur and stood it up, like a chimp femur and a human femur, and you stood them up on a table, the human femur is going to lean a little bit. And then you can see this in this picture. This is because what it ends up doing is it brings the knees in more towards the midline of the body, so we have more efficient walking because we're walking bipedally. So it's this whole, like basically being bipedal has changed like every part of our body. Okay, so we're going to come back to bipedalism in a minute, but we're going to talk about a little bit about some of the early hominins. So like I said, this is like the simplest overview for you. I really, like in the bio anthropology course, we get into this in more detail, but this class you don't really need to know a lot of the morphology. This isn't a morphological class. I want you to understand some of this to get into the cultural part. So this is just a very big overview. Okay, or a very general overview. So if you're looking at slide 13, you'll see on, once again, my chart, my little graphic that I made you, chimps, humans, last common ancestor, and those early genera. So imagine we're kind of going through that lineage in like time, right around 6 million years ago, 5 million years ago are going to be those first ones. So here we have them listed: Sahelanthropus, Auroran, Ardipithecus. Those are the genera. Genera is plural for species. Like I said, don't stress you. I'm not going to ask you about Sahelanthropus in this class. Just know, like we have fossils of them. We know that they were. I was going to say we're ancestral. You have more of like what we call the ancestral condition. Like they look very similar to what we had seen in the past before that, because there's only been a handful of changes. And so if you go to the next slide, on slide 14, you'll see two of those first specimens we found for two of those genera. So the first one you'll see there with Sahelanthropus, and you might be noticing a few things, and I hope you do, that the brain, from what you can see from this one picture, the brain area is still fairly small. We only see a small jump in brain size. It's not as if, like I said, it's not as if big brains happen like suddenly right away and they've been big for 6 million years. It's not how it happened. They still have that really prominent brow ridge there. There's no mandible, but you can kind of see where if there were one, because those teeth are still kind of medium sized. They're not as tiny as like human teeth, so they're still a bit medium sized. Even the canine is medium, moderate size. So we still have, it's like I said, even though these might be considered, there's still some debate for sure. Are these actually in our lineage? Are they the first ones? There's evidence that says leading towards yes, some that's like inconclusive. So as we get more fossil evidence, we can hopefully be more clear on that. But let's just assume for the argument that they are both in our lineage, which many would say that they are. You can still see that they, smaller brains, faces are a little flatter, but they're not as if they suddenly look like a Homo sapien. So you have to, as we go through these, you'll see this transition. Okay, so then slide 15. Then if we're going, so you can see here from the picture again in paint, that we're going a little further in time. So this group called the Australopithecines and Paranthropines. Now, you might have heard of them as both being called Australopithecines, but sometimes referred to as the gracile Australopithecines and the robust Australopithecines. A mouthful, right? But we don't really refer to them that way anymore. Most paleoanthropologists wouldn't say that. We would say no. Initially, people thought they were all kind of one genus, but we realize now that with more fossil evidence and stuff, that they were clearly two distinct genera, one genus and another genus. And so now one has retained that initial genus name of Australopithecine, and then now the other one is Paranthropine. So, and just some examples of the Australopithecines. We have Australopithecus anamensis, Afarensis, Africanus. Some of these you might have heard of. And then the Paranthropines, we have Paranthropus aethiopicus, Paranthropus robustus, and Paranthropus boisei. Okay. Like I said, for this class, I'm not gonna ask you about this to spell that or something. So, don't stress about that. If you go to, there's a lot of information about this group, a lot. It's very interesting. I like talking about it. A lot of my research kind of focuses on some of this stuff. But like I said, this is the cultural class. I don't want to get too far into it, but I do want to point out just a couple things so you know. And also, hopefully from the graphic you get, there's a lot of branching events. Some of these species are not in our direct line, like they are not our direct ancestor. They're just in this group of since the split with chimps until humans. There's a lot of branching events and things that are only kind of sort of, related to each other. So just know not all of these species are our direct ancestor. Okay, so slide 16. So comparing these two groups though, Australopithecines versus Paranthropines, Australopithecines had a very, what we call generalized diet. Paranthropines had more of a specialized diet. So at this time in our lineage, it's all plants still, a combination of different plants, probably like a chimpanzee that they might supplement it occasionally with, insects and stuff, but it's, 99% of the time it's plant food, which is why I talked about before about when you look at human molars, we're like classic frugivores. We have a frugivore molar. It's because for the majority of our lineage, that's what we were eating, But Australopithecines, had a more generalized diet, so they're eating a lot of different things, versus Paranthropines had a very specialized diet. And we're still trying to understand exactly what that was based on the fossil evidence. And there's been a lot of back and forth about this in our field. Was it this? Was it really hard food? Was it tough food? Those are different things. Was it food that you needed to do a lot of crushing versus a lot of chewing? And so because if you look at this picture of the teeth, you'll see it's a modern human, and then compared to a Paranthropine, their premolars and molars are massive. Look at those teeth. Look at those teeth. They're huge. They were chewing all day long. So they were chewing something. So my advisor always says, imagine a bipedal cow, essentially. It's probably what, and it's probably accurate. So they were eating probably something very specialized, kind of like how we see the difference between chimps and gorillas, where chimps are eating kind of more of a variety of things. Gorillas stick with a couple things, so maybe not as nutritious, at least not more readily available in that resource, but they can. It's they can still get resources, nutrition from it, and not a lot of other animals are eating it, so they have it's an option for them. And pros and cons to both strategies. If you have a more generalized diet, if something, if there's a drought that knocks something out, you're well, we'll just eat this instead. So that's a pro. But a pro of having a specialized diet is you might pick a resource that no one else is really eating, so it's more readily available because of that reason. So there are pros and cons to either. But anyway, okay. So both of these groups, Australopithecines and Paranthropines, they were about the same size in terms of height. They both had a similar brain size. Their body types were a little different because of the food that they were eating. And this is really the main difference, is the food that they were eating. So it drastically changed this complex of their jaw. So the Paranthropine teeth are enormous. Australopithecine teeth aren't tiny like ours, but they're definitely more medium sized. But those Paranthropus teeth are just huge, and their jaws are huge, and the muscles that are attaching to the top of their head for chewing are massive. Everything's just so big, but everything's big here. They're not big here, with the exception of just I talked about with the gorilla, they probably had a larger gut because they needed more intestines to process that food. So that would have been the only difference. But in terms of brain size or height, these two groups probably were fairly similar looking. Okay, slide 17, and here are just some examples. So this is Australopithecus afarensis, and if you're familiar with the famous fossil Lucy, so that's her in the picture on the right. That's her compared to a modern human. So you can see that she was clearly bipedal. We can tell by the pelvis and the legs and everything. But look at her arms. We know that her arms and her fingers still indicated possibly that maybe that the species might still have been partially arboreal, or it's just a feature that just hadn't, they just still had it because of the way genetics works, and they just, hadn't been eliminated through natural selection, But you can see the fingers are a little bit longer and the arms are still a bit long. So this is a point of research for a lot of paleoanthropologists. And then Smithsonian did this amazing recreation of, you know, putting skin and hair, because you can look at that skull and be like, okay, cool skull, but then you're like, oh wow. And if you look at that, you're like, okay, that was, you know, only a few million years ago. That definitely still looks more like what we consider, you know, more ancestral looking. So if you go to slide 10, you'll see another example. This is Australopithecus africanus, and the same thing. So we're seeing a little bit, you know, less prognathism, brain is a little bigger, but we're not seeing any major differences. The only thing we're really seeing now is we're definitely seeing that they're clearly bipedal at this point, versus in those first few, there's still debate. Like some of the osteological evidence, like for, like, let's say for example, Sahelanthropus or Ardipithecus, some of the fossil evidence is indicating that they were bipedal. But, you know, I mentioned this before, if you have like 2 or 3 bones, you're like, that's great. But if you have like 200 bones, you'd be like, okay, we're sure now. So we're still kind of getting the fossil evidence, and you know, people are still researching it and, you know, analyzing it. So, but by now with the Paranthropines and Australopithecines, we're like, yeah, for sure, like no doubt, we have like hundreds of specimens. So, and then slide 19, you'll see an example. So that picture, I know I should have blacked that out. It says Australopithecus boisei. We don't call it that. Like I said before, it would be Paranthropus boisei. And you can see from the side, that lateral view, that jaw is insanely big. And those teeth, look at those teeth, they're huge. And because of this whole complex with the chewing and the muscles, it's like basically pulling the space, you know, and the zygomatics, or like what we call flaring zygomatics, are so far out. Because, so when you chew, like if you're chewing and you notice like the muscles on the side of your head move, like next time someone's chewing food next to you, like pay attention, because you have muscles that attach up here. But for a lot of these like apes and those in our lineage, the muscles were much bigger and attached here. Those muscles are so big, they're behind this bone right here, your zygomatic bone. And because ours are fairly small, our zygomatic bone isn't very like flared out. But that bone for them, as far as what we are pretty sure, that bone is so protruding out like way far because that muscle behind it is so big for chewing. So you can see that in the picture that their cheeks are like, you know, way out here. It's crazy. So another Smithsonian recreation. Okay, slide 20. So just a couple things to kind of consider. Evidence of culture. I mean, that's, you know, the point of this class. We're talking about culture. Now at this point, in our lineage, no evidence does not mean, like, no evidence isn't evidence of anything. So maybe they had tools. They probably did. We know that even like, you know, like chimpanzees now have tools, and other primates do, but it didn't preserve. So what if they had this whole amazing complex tool system with using, you know, wood? Wouldn't have preserved, or at least very, very unlikely. So we wouldn't know. We might uncover something eventually. So we just never know. Their brains were still pretty small, but they were still a little bigger than a modern chimp. And we know modern chimps like use tools and have complex social interactions. So why wouldn't they have? And then the question of language, do they have language abilities at this point? I would say my opinion as a paleoanthropologist, probably not quite at this point. Probably just not too much not too much longer after this. I think it's more obvious that we do. But it's still a question, you know, it's one of those things like we don't know, and there's probably not ever going to be evidence to show either way. So we can never really say like, oh, the evidence indicates. It's going to be a lot harder to tell about some of this stuff. Okay, so slide 21. So some other questions to consider. So why was there a transition to bipedalism? This is important. I think I have a slide coming up in a second that kind of poses a few options for you. But also, what anatomical changes occurred because of this transition? So we talked about those before. But the follow-up question to that is, what are the problems associated with it? So we often don't think of it this way. Like, what are the problems that happened? So we've only had a few million years to adjust our entire bodies to walking on 2 limbs versus 4. And it's changed every part of our anatomy. This is why people have back problems, hip problems, knee problems, feet problems, like every person, especially as you age, because like that's just how it works. Now you have your entire body weight on your feet on 2 limbs, and you could say, well, we're adapted though. You talked about it already. You talked about, you know, the secondary arch and the blah 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 and the other thing. That's accurate. However, go to slide 22, and I'm not sure if I talked about this concept with you guys, but if not, if I did, you're getting it twice, and if not, here it goes. So even when we're talking about natural selection, you have to remember natural selection is not about reaching this optimal state of perfection, this ideal, that's not how it is. It's always about just doing something a little better that works a little better than the other thing that you were doing before. And per this expression, you don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the person next to you. It's not about being the fastest person ever, it's just about being, I'm gonna do a little better than that guy. And that's how natural selection works. So bipedalism, for whatever reason, was a little better of a strategy than being quadrupedal. It doesn't mean it's without problems, even millions of years later. And then pair that then with like that we're more sedentary and more people have like more body weight on them, and so like that's, our feet are like, oh my god, what's happening? Okay, so slide 23. Oh, so I just one more thing about bipedalism. So it did change the shape of our pelvis. Did I not have a slide on that? Oh, I guess this is it. Okay, so when you see the chimp versus the human pelvis and childbirth. So one, for humans, Homo sapiens, our babies are born with bigger heads. But also the shape of the pelvis is drastically changed because we're bipedal. And so childbirth is much more difficult for humans. I'm like blank. I was like, what are we called? On humans. And so I want you to remember this one later when we talk about some like, reproductive strategy or reproductive roles and male versus female, and some of this is going to be important. And the cultural factors surrounding like childbirth and childcare. So this has something to do with it. But it's interesting also from this, biological perspective that there's this kind of competing strategy of bipedalism is working really well for us. We should probably keep doing it, but well, our babies are getting stuck, or they might be getting stuck. So it's this like competing strategy, and like, so it's an interesting concept to think about. We call that the obstetric dilemma. And slide 24. Okay, so this is what I was going to say earlier, that there are multiple hypotheses about why we became bipedal. It's very likely a combination of like more than one thing, but just so you know, typically the ideas that are referenced are it's more energy efficient. There were probably in the environmental some drastic changes ecologically or in the diet or with available resources that might have been a factor, and sexual selection, because we always think that's, which is probably a combination of things. Slide 25, I just want to point out one thing about it being more efficient. And so very likely in the environment, if the food resources were changing or areas where food availability was shifting, and we suddenly had to, instead of going from like this, tree to this tree to get food, suddenly it was like we gotta walk a long way to get food and then walk more. Humans are, and this is, like I said before, about trade-offs. There's always, a trade-off for something. That we became bipedal, which now we are not fast at all. Like bipeds, humans, we are not fast at all. I don't know if I gave you guys this example about this happens with me with these girls. And when I get them out of the bath, they're like, whoosh, like the zoomies around the apartment, they're going crazy, and there's no way I could catch them. And this has happened years ago, but Waffle got off her leash, and like I just chased her. It was pointless. Like they're so fast. Quadrupeds are really fast, and bipeds are not. However, this is the point of this slide, is that bipeds are we're not fast, but we can go very long distances, and quadrupeds cannot. So if you're running with your dog, even if you're like, I haven't jogged in a while, you could probably jog a mile and be like, you're like, okay, I'm kind of maybe a little out of breath, but you're like, I'm good. Your dog's gonna be like, oh my god, I'm dying, And then imagine like if you ran every day, you're like, I'm in 5 miles every morning. I have a friend, she runs like about 5 miles pretty much every day. But no quadruped can do that like consistently. They can go really fast, but only short distances. And so this is a trade-off, and then you have like, humans doing like these ultra marathons, and it's just like, I don't think I could do that, but because we're bipedal, we can do that. We can't go very fast, and we can go long distances. It's a very unique and interesting ability that we have. So you might think, well, what's better? And like I said, it's never about reaching an optimal state. There's going to be a trade-off often for anything that's happening evolutionarily, but it probably, given that environment, probably having to do with food, maybe having to do a little bit with social interactions and sexual selection, it probably just works a little better, and so that's the trajectory we went on. Okay, so that's it for this one, and I will see you guys on the next one.